Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next edition of the Thea Ventures podcast, Unheated. We are an early stage climate tech fund based in India, and today we're really excited to invite Harry from Treeconomy here to our podcast and to talk about nature based carbon removal. So, thanks again, Harry, for being part of the podcast today.
Pleasure. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me on.
Great. So just a bit of a background on Tree Economy. Tree Economy develops nature-based carbon removal projects, and their ambition is to place a strong emphasis on traceability, transparency, and trust. They do this through remote sensing technology and AI systems to better monitor and measure and monetize the carbon impact of nature-based projects. The company was founded in 2018 and is backed by Climate VC and other institutional investors. Harry's background is that he has a master's in science in climate change management and finance from Imperial College Business School. And prior to founding Triconomy, he worked in a wealth management firm called Philip Hamilton Wealth Management, specializing in high net worth estate planning. He also has a background in physical geography, as well as experience consulting in the voluntary carbon market and in decarbonization strategies for the extractive sector. So it comes with lots of relevant background for starting this company. And yeah, so first off, Harry, obviously being an entrepreneur is a challenging but really rewarding experience. Would love to know, for our listeners, what actually made you start the company, Tree Economy, and also perhaps you could help us understand what Tree Economy does specifically, since it operates at the intersection of technology, nature, and carbon markets. And how do you balance being a technology provider, project developer, and a market enabler?
Super. Okay, brilliant. Yeah, so I can jump in, I guess, on why Treeconomy was started in the first place, and I should probably lead off by saying my dad is a geography teacher, or was a geography teacher, recently retired. So I've grown up with geography, physical landscapes, climate change, all of these things as just kind of my day to day. Family holidays, school holidays would be spent with features being pointed out by dad in the car, or different things like that. So it was something I grew up with. I went and did my undergraduate course in physical geography, mainly just because I thought that was the only thing I was interested in and very good at. Um, but then realized there's basically no jobs in that. So I ended up working in finance, in London, in the city. That's a really big employer, and I had absolutely no idea what wealth management was, what finance was as a sector. I was completely ignorant of everything on that side. So really just stumbled into it, which I'm very grateful for, because it was an awesome three and a half years I spent at St James's Place and with Philip Hamilton. Um, it gave me a good grounding in financial markets, sort of writ large, by working in wealth management. And I realized my big sort of crystallizing thought process there was, wow, there's a lot of money. Like that we are not short of capital and finance in a single country, or on a global international basis. And I'd always just assumed that climate change wasn't being mitigated and solved for because we just didn't have enough money available. Um, and realizing, no, actually, there's loads of money, and it just doesn't know how to find its way to be put to work in the best place. That was the bit where I thought, okay, I understand. If we can design a system, and it is that kind of big systems thinking process to begin with, whereby all of this money, this capital, specifically sort of pension funds and other income seeking investments, can be put to work for something that combats climate change, restores natural ecosystems, then that's a massive win. And clearly it's not happening. So that's an opportunity. And that's something that I find exciting. It means you can keep one foot in the kind of slightly sexy, slick finance world, but also be doing something that's genuinely impactful. So that was the first piece. And then I think for most entrepreneurial journeys, you sort of need something to kick you off the edge, because it's quite safe and comforting where you are in an employed job. You don't have to worry about things. And sort of jumping off and saying, no, I'm going to do something totally new is quite scary. So there were two things for that. One, I was really interested in fintech in London. That was a really interesting sort of VC space at the time when I was looking at this. Still is. Um, And I started seeing a bunch of these companies that labeled themselves as impact, but they just weren't very impactful. And I could see them raising really good venture rounds. This was what would have been 2016 to 2019, probably. So a really interesting sort of fintech time up and coming. And that just made me really angry because I just thought these are not impact. Like this is almost greenwash. So that made me angry. And then my job meant I was going to become self-employed anyway. So then I thought, well, if I now have this sort of fork in the road, this is actually where I want to do something I genuinely care about. So that was then the push that I needed to make the jump. And then just very briefly, the kind of TLDR on what Treeconomy is and what we do. Unsurprisingly, the intention and the mission is to build those vehicles that can take finance in, basically. So how do we create something that can be financed and then can be financed at scale to combat climate change and in so doing to restore natural ecosystems? We decided to look at the carbon removal sector because that has had less funding and isn't yet at the inflection point that renewable energy is at. Renewable energy, solar, wind, it's now cost competitive. It doesn't need subsidies. It's off on its own, and that will scale. Carbon removal is the other side of that. We need to reduce emissions, and then we need to remove whatever's left. Removal isn't there yet, so that's where we want to put our time because we need to get that to a similar space where it can go exponential. So we're looking to basically market make. We find really amazing projects on the ground. We want to connect those with the corporate buyers of carbon removal, mix those two together so they can sort of, A meets B, and then ensure that there's trust. Because if we're dealing with nature restoration, things like tree planting or mangrove restoration or rewilding, the big question is how do you quantify, prove, and evidence that you've actually had an impact? And that's where our sort of software technology focuses. So we have that in the middle and then actively connecting buyers and sellers.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that really comprehensive overview of the business and then your background as well. So on the topic of, connecting buyers to these projects, have you faced any sort of challenges in the transparency piece? There's obviously a news article a day about carbon markets and
Yeah.
offsetting and how there's a certain degree in globally that firms have been disclosing not so sort of verified information in the sense that it's false information. So what kind of measures have you put into place to make sure that your projects are really kind of true to what they're actually tracking and developing on the ground?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it is. I think it's a problem that every single company in our entire sector will face because it's a sector-wide problem, and that's the issue. It's chronic, and we read it in news articles as though it's discrete, which is to say that there's like a bad actor here or a bad actor there. There's going to be bad actors in every sector that anyone ever works in. That's just a fact of human nature, I think. The question is then, do we have the safeguards around that to be able to call it out when it does happen? You're never going to be able to prevent it happening at all. It's just having the consistency and the format and the trust that can be caught, captured, and something then acted upon. So I think that is an issue across the entire market. I mean, the voluntary carbon market, which is the market sector that we work within. We are transacting an invisible gas, which is CO2 or CO2 removal or avoided, to start with. There is never any physical delivery of that. If you think about it as a commodity in oil markets or copper markets or whatever, eventually someone will receive a barrel of oil somewhere. Like that will, if you're transacting a derivative or a commodity over the market, it doesn't matter. There will be some form of physical delivery. In our market, there's no physical delivery. It stays where it is. So you've got these sort of electronic, international, multinational transfers of something that you can't see that never gets given to you. So the barrier for trust, or the high watermark for trust, should be super high, but it just hasn't been. We've relied on very manual processes to date. So the way that carbon is accounted for within a forest ecosystem still today, even with the updates, is very manual. So we send people to the forest with tape measures, and they will sample a very small percentage, probably less than 1% of an area, and then you just multiply by the area. And that gives you a very linear expansion. So just within that, you can begin to understand there are uncertainties and errors that just aren't even known, but are very, very large. So for Treeconomy, the first thing that we reviewed was this problem when we started out. So 2018, 2019, it was how do we, from a first principles perspective, how should you account for carbon within a forest ecosystem as accurately as possible using new and more scalable technologies. So that means remote sensing for us. So using imagery or radar data, for example, from satellites. And then specifically for us and where we specialize is in very high resolution drone image and 3D data analysis. So flying a drone over a forest, you can get very high resolution images. So sort of 3 to 5 centimeter resolution sort of pixels. You can see individual trees. And if I can see it, it means you can train a computer vision model to also go and see that. So then we can begin to have a more accurate assessment on how many trees are within a forest, for example, which is obviously, it sounds obvious, right? Like it should be a fundamental input, but at the moment we still don't know that data. In addition, we can then do 3D height for individual trees. If we can see it, we can then figure out the height. That then means that we have, again, much more accurate information on the size of those trees as well. So it's those kind of bits that we're beginning to build in as a technology stack for us as a business to ensure the actual carbon data, the sort of ones and twos coming out of it are really good. And then the other side of this is building a slightly more qualitative due diligence process for projects. We need to ensure that there's a do no harm policy on these projects, both from a social perspective, engaging with communities, but then also from an environmental perspective. There's no point having really great carbon data if it's a monoculture plantation that shouldn't exist and actually causes ecological damage. That also doesn't solve it. So we have to be considering multiple factors at the same time.
Got it. No, that sounds very sort of detailed, and you've clearly thought through, the quantitative and the qualitative piece. I'm curious, do you also use sort of hyperspectral data from satellites? Do you also use, the sort of soil monitoring as well? How have you sort of thought about also the expansion from, just forestry and tree planting to, you mentioned mangroves earlier, blue carbon, and also biochar, and other sorts of different elements of this carbon removal journey?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a great point, right? The thing I love the most about working in our sector is that there are so many different areas to work on. You can learn something new and look at something different every single day. For us at the moment, so hyperspectral is a moderately new technology type coming out generally from satellites. We've seen some of it from drone-based as well. It's something we are toying with in an R&D state at the moment. It's not something that we've stood up and have in a production monitoring format. There's a balance that we've found between sort of cutting edge, not necessarily black box, but like just very new information, and then things that are relevant and deployable and that can be audited by perhaps non-experts in the sector. So we're often trying to sort of play off best in class and most scalable versus, or perhaps not so scalable, with that is scalable. So hyperspectral, for example, for us right now is in that sort of R&D bucket and not in the deployment state. Soil monitoring is something that we want to be including. It's not something that Treeconomy will do ourselves, but our platform product, Sherwood, where project developers can see all of our analysis and track their project performance. We can, and we already have ingested soil carbon data, for example, that a third-party provider can go in and build. Soil carbon monitoring it's really important, but it's a real specialism, and we know that's not where our specialism lies. So, I mean, I've already gone through a number of different things that we're having to juggle and think about at the same time. So then a really important job for myself and Rob, my co-founder, is to figure out which areas are we not going to do as well as the ones that we are going to do. So what we do select, we do best in class, and those where we don't do it, we can pass it off to a third party. So soil, for example, will fit into that side of it. And then the expansion for different ecosystems is an area we're very active on at the moment. So we've just taken on some investment from a Norwegian group called Catapult Ocean. And that's so that we can very specifically focus on building a best-in-class monitoring program for mangrove restoration projects. So that is a chosen, very explicit ecosystem that we are leaning into. We specialize in restoration projects. So that began with afforestation or reforestation projects. Through 2022 and 2023, we then worked on rewilding projects, these big landscape programs where maybe you're not actively planting, but you're stepping back and reducing things that cause degradation to allow an ecosystem to rebound naturally. And now our third one is mangroves. So that's our kind of next step. And we're currently building a series of processes that will be relevant for that as well.
Great. Thanks a lot for that. And do you, when you're thinking about, for example, you receive funding from a Norwegian player and you're asked to sort of look at mangroves or rewilding, how do you sort of go about selecting the right partners on the supply side? What do you sort of zoom out and look at, okay, on the geography side, I want to do this in either Africa or Asia or Europe or the Americas. And then after that, how do you sort of zoom in and find the right players to actually partner with and be your sort of executors on the ground?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is something we're like bang sort of active on at the moment. This is really a big central discussion. We had a big stand-up town hall a couple of days ago to kind of go through the processes we're building for this. So I suppose just a couple of things that are to explain it and how we work. So the first thing we do is to not filter. So it's to go super wide. We're building a series of very early satellite-based technical assessments that are relevant for pretty much any developer working on any form of restoration program in any geography. So I think at the moment we have developers listed on platform across 22 or 23 different countries, which gives you an idea for the spread. So from Canada to Brazil, Central Africa in the DRC, Tanzania, Indonesia, New Zealand. We have the full spread, and that's then from the tropics upwards, and we've got some in the highlands of Scotland as well. So we have a real range that we're working on, and we, again, this impact thesis for us is to build a technology that solves a chronic market problem. So we have to be able to have that to be super scalable and deployable anywhere. So any developer of any quality, any program can use that information to help them design a better carbon project. So you need to build your baseline and evidence any degradation over the last 10 to 15 years, for example. We have a system that can do that. You need to then figure out how much of your site is eligible for project intervention, and we can do that for them as well. And then you're probably looking at something along the lines of a carbon projection. So how do you look forwards and build those kind of those early stage bits of information? So that we provide to developers across the globe. And then it's a process of narrowing down and figuring out, okay, which of those projects are in a position where we can then very actively and hands-on help them to develop and then move through that sort of customer journey. And that's where we have our own internal filters. So we can provide early stage technical monitoring to any project, but then if we're helping a project to get financing or to go and find a buyer, for example, we have to be very specific for the projects that we do and don't select. And that's then an internal quality process that we've built over the last 3 years. And that's basically ensuring that there's, like we said before, a good ecosystem underneath it. Are they doing the necessary social surveying and auditing process to ensure that's being deployed? And then increasingly, there's a bit of an operational question as well. So is this developer ready to scale? Have they got the necessary pieces in place? To give you an idea of the kind of expansion on this, we're supporting projects that then need to take in investment between about $5 and $50 million for each individual project. So there's this sort of scaling process, and we're helping them through that program. And so there's quite a natural sort of filtering and tailoring of projects that actually fit those criteria. And then what we're trying to do for the projects that don't yet fit that is to say, okay, you don't fit it, and these are the things that you need to do in order to improve. If a developer then says, yes, we're going to do that, that's great, and they can stay in the system. If they're not going to do that or they're not willing to change it, that's when we then have to be quite hard nosed and say, sadly, you are not a Treeconomy project. We can't work with you on this. And it's just as important for us to know how to scale a good project as it is to say no to a project when they do come in. And we've had to do that already for quite a few, which is a tricky balance because obviously, as a venture-backed startup, the incentive is to scale, scale, scale. But then in our sector, we have to make sure that it's scale with quality, and those two things go hand in hand. So we're having to turn down potential short-term revenue for long-term sort of quality and sort of brand positioning.
Yeah, no, understood. It must be a difficult process, I think, to find the right partners to go with and, and really kind of hone in on all of the attributes that make for a successful long-term partnership, right?
Yeah, it is, and it's because it's not just one way either. It's triangulating. So we've got
Mm,
working with the developers and are they good, and then what do the buyers need to have a look at, and what are the investors willing to fund and finance. So there's a lot of these things going across, and then also just a first principled view on is this good as a project? Like if I explain this project to my mum or my dad, will they agree that it's a good project, or will they go, that doesn't sound great? So it's then layering that in, which is sort of qualitative but and makes logical sense, but it's trying to match that and then build it into a system that's scalable. So it's tricky, and you can see that's where we spend a lot of our time. So but it's important because there are sadly a number of projects and companies that just don't do that. So for us as a company, we need to find that space of true quality and precision.
understood, understood. And last July you actually recorded, or you sort of achieved a groundbreaking milestone with a carbon removal sale at 100 euros per ton, which was first of its kind, etc. So I was just curious to understand what inspired this project and how do you see this influencing the broader market for nature-based carbon credits?
Sure. Yeah. So that transaction we were super happy about. It was really the culmination of about 18 months work. It was the first time we'd seen a transaction go through at that level, at that price point for nature-based carbon removal. It was also the first ever rewilding carbon credit that's been monitored, that was sold to a buyer. So I mean, there's a lot that's gone into it. I mean, first of all, it's finding the right partner and the right project developer. So Nattergal were the developer based in the UK. Their project's in England. It's just an amazing project design, and that was the first bit of this, where you just look at something and you think, wow, yes, this is exactly the pin-up project that we want to back. This is what we've been looking for. I think absolutely everyone would want to have Nattergal and their projects in their sort of stable of projects that they're supporting. It's a rewilding project, so it also means it's quite tricky. It's not normal. It doesn't fit the sort of plantation forestry 2 meter spacing system. They're not doing that at all, which means a lot of other similar companies to us would ignore them because they're not easy, right? They're not the sort of rapid scale deployment piece. But we thought this is the sort of project we want to support. So about 18 months prior, we'd started getting some R&D funding. We were very fortunate to get funding from the likes of Rewilding Britain, for example. So they gave us some grant funding to go and build some new systems. So start toying around with how do you calculate the carbon content of a rewilding project where perhaps there aren't going to be any trees in the first 10 to 15 years. And you have this scrubby, messy, bushy sort of ecosystem that pops up. You look at it and you think there's obviously lots of stuff there. There's lots of woody stuff. That stuff includes a lot of carbon. How do you do that? That's really, really hard to build or to solve for. But actually was really well suited to the very high precision technology system that we were building. So it felt like a natural expansion for us to build into. We tested that on the Knepp estate in Sussex. This is the rewilding project in the UK. It's about 25 years old. and Nattergal is now the sister company from the NEP estate. So it's the kind of private entity looking to basically go out and replicate what they've done on a for-profit basis. So again, it kind of fits our thesis as well, which is let's do something that is profitable, where nature intrinsically makes money and isn't reliant on philanthropic funding. So we had this kind of coalition of really amazing implementers on the ground, a real need for quantification and data and information, where you've got a really genuinely charismatic, impactful project type, which is super important in our space because the voluntary carbon market is voluntary. Like no one has to do any of this. So the fact it exists at all is kind of amazing. So you have to have something that's really good, but also then triggers those kind of emotional pulls where people say, yes, I actually really do want this. And then the final part is finding a buyer that's willing to meet you where the price point is, which is this is a hard project. It's not easy. The technology is expensive. We need it to hit this sort of €100 per unit price point for it to work. And that's where we were very fortunate to find Naturalis, so the biodiversity center in the Netherlands. And we were connected by an accelerated program called Remove that we were part of as well to help sort of foster carbon removal startups. So again, we'd just been very fortunate, I think, to be within the right ecosystem of operators who could connect us. So Rewilding Britain giving us some funding, Remove supporting us to find buyers that are looking for these innovative purchases. And I think then for us to have just sort of taken a bit of a bet and said, well, no, we're going to build this technology because we can see a problem. It might not be super clear exactly how we do it, but we know directionally this is the right place to go in. So yeah, I mean, it all came together July last year with this €100 per ton transaction. And we think it's the first of quite a few more that we're looking to roll out. So it's super exciting. It sort of resets the expectation for what good looks like and what good can achieve as well. If you're starting to sell these credits at €100, you can actually start to have some serious ecosystem and carbon impact. And it just realigns all the right incentives. So yeah, we were super excited. I think we're now really, really looking forward to kind of next steps with this as well.
Yeah, congratulations again. It's an incredible achievement. And my other question actually was regarding the demand side. So, and you answered, actually we're quite familiar with Remove because they've just opened an India branch of Remove. And so they had their first cohort of Indian companies going through the accelerator or the cohort, which is quite exciting. But, finding these buyers can also be challenging. It's great that you have, connectors that are there that you can rely on. But how do you think, as you sort of grow in terms of your supply side and you're deploying more energy into finding these projects, how do you find the right buyers? What sort of sectors are you mainly targeting? And what is the criteria? And also, do these buyers have expectations on the time length? Because obviously, growing a forest takes decades. But these firms don't have decades. Many of them have 2030, 2050 targets or sooner. So how do you kind of marry those two objectives together?
Yeah. I mean, this is the killer question, right? This is whichever way you look at it, whether you're a service provider or broker, everything rotates around the buyer. Fundamentally, someone has to buy this, and that is what the market's built on top of. I mean, the first thing to say is it's very hard and very time consuming to find buyers. It should be easy in theory, like use Gemini now or ChatGPT or whatever you want to give me the list of the FTSE 100 or the S&P 500 companies' sustainability targets. But then it's a question of, okay, how do you find the individual in charge of purchasing within those companies? And are they active or have they all been put off by the bad news over the last 2 years? And now what do they think because Trump's coming in? Are they going to slow down and step off? Or will European companies actually now step up even harder? So there's just all of these different questions and equations. And then it's also just enormous, which is, it's not like you're going after pharmaceutical companies with greater than 100 billion market cap or something. Like you're not trying to dissect it in that way because it could be anyone, right? We speak to a number of really interesting Danish buyers that wouldn't necessarily be on our list, but just sort of came to us. And you think, well, okay, I didn't think that you'd be doing this, but you are, and that's amazing. So it's very hard. It's very time consuming for us. We It's always the issue with the two-sided marketplace as well, which effectively is the lens that we work within. So we decided first thing for us to do is go and find the supply. Like you have to have one or the other. So let's just go and find the supply, build that bank. We're now looking to place about 8 megatons of carbon volume through active contracts. We've got about 20 to 25 megatons that we should have marketable by the end of 2025. So we have that supply base now, and that's a really strong position for us. The question is, which buyers are we going to go after? And the good thing now is there are a few very large buyers that are putting their head above the parapet and saying, come here and pitch to us. And that's going to make our life a lot easier. I think everyone within our space is going to be doing exactly the same thing. So it'll be a real test of who is good enough and a bit of a who's who. And generally, this is all driven by the big AI hyperscalers. So Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon now actually included within that, and a few others, Salesforce included. They are the ones that are saying, come here and pitch to us. And that's quite different to sort of going and trying to find company here or company there, sustainability manager there. So that's really our focus, is to try and narrow down and just focus on a couple of really big buyers. There's a number of other companies that are spending a lot of time trying to find all the buyers, and I think we're just going to try and build a relationship with them instead. It's again that question of time and resource, and where's the value add on that side. And then the bit you mentioned at the end around time length, I think that's the real shift that we're seeing right now. The voluntary carbon market of, I don't know, 2020 to 2022, 23 maybe, was a lot of spot transactions. It was a lot of companies saying, I want to be carbon neutral this year. I'm going to buy any volume I can buy and tick the box. Now what you've got are companies that are saying, I need to be net zero by a date in the future. So we're having to match that requirement with our contracts. So it's no longer buy it and retire it or use it right now. It's sign a contract to buy X amount over the next 12 to 15 years, for example. And then there's some really interesting questions for when do companies act, because if you've got a 2030 or a 2035 target, there's not going to be a lot of volume available at all, because you've got all these big buyers sucking up everything that is available. And if you're not doing it now, you're going to get caught short in the future. So there is a bit of an education piece on that as well. I think my final point on this is it's very good to see buyer clubs coming together now as well. So we saw this within the engineered carbon removal space with Frontier. And now for nature-based, we've got the same, which is the Symbiosis Coalition. So this is a group of buyers looking to buy about 20 million tons of carbon removal by 2030, driven by the big tech companies, but then smaller companies or those without the big resource in their sustainability teams can also join and sort of co-buy alongside them. So it distributes that due diligence lift between them. And that's a really, really big enabling function for new projects.
Excellent. Thanks a lot for outlining all of those. So lots of exciting times ahead with new coalitions come together, and then lots of demand coming from the big AI players, as you've mentioned. So as we sort of come to the end of our discussion today, I had just a few last questions to ask you. One of them was, of your view of the kind of emerging market opportunity for your marketplace, especially obviously on the supply side, but even on the demand side. Do you see any interesting customers coming up from this side of the world? As you know, Theia Ventures operates in India, and India is one of the, I think it's the third largest emitter globally after US and China. So definitely there could be interest from Indian corporates as well. But of course, on the nature-based side, India has, about 70% of the country is employed in agriculture. It has one of the longest coastlines. 25% of the country is covered in forests. There's a large mangrove, restoration sort of set of projects already happening. So I'm curious how you think of this side of the world, in terms of both tapping into the project potential, but
Yep.
also into customers.
Yeah, I mean it's enormous would be the shorthand for that, which is I mean, we're probably slightly more experienced right now on the supply side of that. So the kind of land-based, nature-based opportunity set. So going there first, I mean, the simple answer is just look at the land masses that are available here. Whether that's land mass or coastline, it's just very, very, very big. And I'm coming at this from a London, UK based piece where we're a very small island. And we very quickly realized as a company here we were going to get international very quickly, because you have to. But it is just that's where the opportunity sits. The natural capital resource that is on hand in these emerging markets is massive. The question is, how do we bring that value to market? And how do we appropriately value that? And how do we also sensibly distribute the revenue and earnings that come from that? Because I think there's also a really brilliant sort of social benefit here, which is that there's payment available to restore ecosystems to those farmers, community members around this, which is a really important part of that sort of just climate transition. This isn't just sort of saying everyone must cut emissions immediately, because you've got these emerging markets that need to continue to develop their economies as well. So the way that we see this is it's a really powerful tool to support that community empowerment as well. There's a question here around the kind of government approvals and the ministry side of things for that we're finding in emerging markets that is generally a little bit more difficult than perhaps slightly more developed markets, although not massively so. It's not as if bureaucracy is big worldwide in most government entities anyway. So it's not an enormous shift, but I think that is a bit of a blocker. And then there's also a bit of education as well on the financing side. So how do we get investors comfortable with deploying moderately large sums of money into these projects? Again, a solvable problem and something where there's really good tailwinds around this with blended finance, for example, and development finance institutions that are helping. But again, it's not, it's this kind of multi-stakeholder piece that needs to be worked on. But the opportunity set is massive. The demand side, I think, we've seen less of this at the moment. Again, our focus is it is kind of AI driven. They're the ones with the requirement and also the brand that demands that they don't look like the bad guys. The exciting thing is, as far as we can see, there's not an enormous amount of emerging market demand yet that's active. So again, if you think about that coming to market and becoming a buyer, then all that does is massively fire up. And I imagine, based off what we've seen, there would probably be a strong domestic preference as well. So those buyers will probably spur that kind of internal emerging market piece as well, which I think is a really exciting sort of setup for us to work into.
No, I agree with you. I think as these domestic buyers and the voluntary carbon markets develop in much more of a robust fashion in countries like India, you'll see a lot of these domestic buyers wanting to circulate capital back
Mm.
into domestic projects, which is, I think, very positive. But I think in addition to that, there is a lot of capital in the global north that does need to find its way into the global south and find, as you rightly said in the beginning of the podcast, there's capital available. It's just a question of unlocking it and finding a way on how to distribute. But really love the conversation. Thank you so much, Harry, for your time today. And we were excited to see what Treeconomy does next. I'm excited to follow your progress. And specifically, if you're interested in, coming to India and exploring collaborations here, we're more than happy to assist and, help to introduce you to players on the market. And so, most of our listeners are based in India, so would invite people to reach out to you if that's okay, if they'd like to learn more.
Yeah, of course. No, please do, please do. And thank you again, Priya, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Of course. Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you.